Drive Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to Spielberg and to the Red Bull Ring. We're about 2.5 hours southwest of Vienna, and I would argue that this is the most picturesque track that we visit on the F1 calendar. The circuit is nestled in the Styrian Mountains in a sort of natural amphitheatre, so the fans have stunning views of the action all the way around this very short and sharp track. And this weekend is the 11th round of the championship, and things are still finely poised in the standings, with Oscar Piastri leading the way, now 22 points clear of his teammate Lando Norris. Joining me to look ahead to all the action this weekend is our lead commentator Ben Edwards, the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson, and racing driver Alice Powell. And Alice, you have raced and won around this track. What is it like? What are the challenges the Red Bull Ring presents?
Yes, it's a circuit that I really enjoy. Actually, not just because I've won around it, but it's different to a lot of circuits that you go to. The way that the car handles, the way that you bring in the tyres, and also the way that the tyres degrade during the session. But it's a great track for overtaking and racing at. You've basically got a heavy braking zone, turn the car and on the throttle. And you do that 2-3 times in a row, particularly in that first into that second sector. Then you've got some high-speed, challenging corners through 6, 7 and turn 9, and then back onto the main straight through turn 10. So it's a short track. Lap times we're seeing way under 1 minute 10 seconds easily, but it's unique. You've got a real steep run up to turn 3. You really have to judge your braking, and because it's a long straight, and if temperatures aren't as high as we expect them to be, you can lose temperature in your tyres. So it's such a challenging track, and we always get a fantastic crowd here as well. The atmosphere is always electric, and particularly the orange army that's out for Verstappen. They come there in their thousands.
Yeah, the atmosphere is incredible, and they have been here since Wednesday, kind of pitching their tents, preparing their camping setup, ready to cheer on, as you say, their hero, Max Verstappen, the Dutch army out in force. Ben, great to have you back on the team with us. As we approach the sort of mid-season point, what have you made of 2025 so far?
Oh, it's been fascinating, really interesting. The battle you've got between the two McLaren teammates, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, with what appears to be the best car, the McLaren. There's no doubt, as we go through all these different circuits, the McLaren is generally the strongest. But the battle between those two drivers, even though they're, as a manufacturer, they're well leading it, it's very close. Of course, there was an incident last time which has actually opened up the gap slightly for Oscar Piastri, but it is still close. But Max Verstappen is still a part of this. And of course, we're coming to a track where Max has had so much success over the years, 5 victories here around this circuit. So this is really going to be another fascinating weekend. And I do think this season is proving to be very, very interesting in terms of the battles between those, and George Russell, of course, winning last time out, and he was the winner here last year. So, there's someone else who can still bite in there and get a few more top results as well.
Yeah, how lucky are we that McLaren let their drivers fight, and that there isn't a sort of number one driver appearing. So we are going to have, hopefully, some more battles between Piastri and Norris. We'll hear from both McLaren drivers over the course of the show, as well as George Russell talking about his future. Of course, his Mercedes contract expires at the end of the season. And we've even got Brad Pitt on the show, guys, of course. The F1 movie is now out. Don't know if you guys have seen it, but we will talk about that a little later on. But it's Oscar Piastri in the real world of F1, leading the way in the championship, 22 points clear of his teammate Lando Norris, and Max Verstappen in P3. And when it comes to the team standings, well, McLaren have a very healthy lead, 374 points now, ahead of Mercedes, who are on 199, and it's Ferrari in third place. Mercedes moving ahead of the Italian team at the last round. So last time out in Canada, Lando Norris came across his teammate in the dying stages of the race in all the wrong ways. He tried to go for a gap that wasn't there. He ran into the back of Oscar Piastri. That ended his afternoon, but Piastri was able to finish the race in fourth. And it now means that Norris is trailing him, as I say, by 22 points. Alice, as a driver, when you start making mistakes, well, in Norris's case, it seems you just keep making them. What can he do to tidy his driving up and to get himself back into a positive momentum?
It's difficult, when he's got such a fast and talented teammate like Oscar Piastri. And we've seen coming up through the junior ranks how good Oscar really is. Winning in Formula 3 in his rookie year, winning Formula 2 in his rookie year. And then he had some time out. We say time out. He didn't really have any racing due to winning Formula 2. You can't come back once you've won the championship. And he was sort of on the sidelines waiting for an opportunity at Alpine, and then an opportunity came along at McLaren. And, it's a tough first year, but he's really put the pressure on, hasn't he, of Lando Norris. And Lando is just struggling to cope with it as much as he'd like. I know there's been big meetings and talks about what Lando can do to improve his qualifying pace, because I think that's what's really hindered him a lot. His race pace has always been okay, but it's that qualifying place, and we know how important it is in any category to have a decent qualifying. But he just needs to try and block everything out from his mind effectively and concentrate on what he can control. But that is a lot easier said than done when you're up against your teammate who's so chilled, so calm, and just is able to find this incredible pace.
Andrew, I was listening to several podcasts in the lead up to this race weekend, and of course the topic has been the Norris versus Piastri, and some of our colleagues have been looking at the times of Piastri and Norris throughout a race weekend this season, and it does seem that it's Q3 where Norris just suddenly can't put it together. What is going on there? Because you're meant to build through a weekend, and that just doesn't seem to be happening.
Well, I think there's a couple of things to say, Rosanna. The first one is that he's finding with this year's McLaren that it's not giving him the messages through the steering wheel that he needs to predict what it's going to do when he's pushing it to the absolute limit. And that's what happens in the final part of qualifying. And that's why what you're referring to is the offset between the number of times Norris is quicker than Piastri in the first and second parts of qualifying, and then the number of times Piastri is quicker than Norris in the final part of qualifying. And it basically flips over when you get to the final part of qualifying, but that's when you're pushing the car right out to the edge, of course, and that's where the car isn't giving him what he wants in terms of feedback. And McLaren have been working with Norris on that, and working with the car to change it a little bit to try and give him those messages. But I think the second thing is that for Norris himself, this has been a bit of a surprise. He spent last year as the lead McLaren driver. He was the dominant figure in that team over Oscar Piastri, won twice as many races. He was the guy who took the championship fight to Max Verstappen. This year it's completely flipped around, and Piastri is the lead McLaren driver. And there was a remark that Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, used a few races ago. He said there are no noises in Oscar's head. And he's talking about what Alice was saying there about how cool and collected Oscar Piastri is. Nothing seems to bother him. Well, you could say the opposite about Lando Norris. At the moment, it seems like there's nothing but noise in his head. And I think it's almost like he's let this problem with the car in Q3 get to him a little bit. And it's like he's trying to push a little bit too much, a little bit more than he needs to. And it's going wrong. He's making mistakes, and maybe if he sometimes as a racing driver, I'm not a racing driver, Alice is, but sometimes if you go faster by going a bit slower, if you like. And I think it seems, also from talking around McLaren a little bit, it seems like Norris has to take that on board and perhaps just rein it in a little bit, rather than trying to push out to the 100% mark all the time. If he just goes for 99%, he might find that his average performance level goes up rather than down.
And I think what it stems from is overdriving, effectively. You're pushing to the limits all the time, but then there's going over those limits. So, if you're going, well, I must be losing some time on the brake, I feel like I'm going to have the grip, and you brake at 90 metres, when actually the optimal is 100 metres to then square the corner off nicely and get that exit. And certainly how close it is this season, those hundredths of a second, those tenths of a second, that could mean 1, 2, 3 places. And certainly here this weekend in Austria, the times are so close. We've seen in the junior categories, in Formula 2, for example, in their qualifying, the top 10 was separated by less than 3 tenths of a second. And we're going to likely to see something very similar in qualifying here this weekend in Formula One. So he just, I think you're right, Andrew, just needs to rein it back a little bit, drive to what he's feeling underneath him. But trust me, when you're under pressure, that's so much easier said than done.
Well, that is Q3, the focus of perhaps Lando Norris this weekend, to get a good qualifying session under his belt. Qualified 7th in Canada and then had that collision with his teammate. Here is Norris reflecting on what happened in Montreal.
The team handled everything very well, of course. Never the nicest position to be in, but I think more for myself rather than anyone else. You know, it was more my pain than anyone else's, but no, it was all good, and everyone was very much on board on resetting and making sure we're ready to focus on here and not letting it affect our races and our championship and what we're actually here to fight for, which is a very good thing.
Nearly halfway through the season, 3 months or so of racing. Lots has happened. Really a simple question. How are you? How are you feeling?
I'm good now. I mean, I'm fine. Excited still for everything that's to come, for the races we have coming up, for here. One that I normally enjoy and has great racing, good opportunities for everyone. And of course, it's where I had my first podium. It's where us as a team took a good step forward a few years ago and kind of got on the path that's led us to where we are today. But yeah, I wouldn't say completely satisfied with my season. I think that's been obvious through just some of the results and things I've said through the season. Some more difficult moments, obviously some great moments. It's not the season I probably would have envisioned prior to the season, but different circumstances, different things that have led to it being trickier than what I would have liked. But it doesn't change anything apart from the fact, I still want to try and win here this weekend. I still want to improve on some of the things I need to improve on in order to fight at the top.
Ben, what was your take on it? Does it show that Norris's mindset is wavering slightly? Is it a concentration thing? How's it going to affect him going forward as well?
It's a good point, because I do think it's a mental thing, because his talent is still as good as ever. I mean, the fact, he won in Australia that opening race in the rain, and then he won at Monaco, taking pole position, winning in Monaco, and that was another fantastic performance. So he's got that ability, but it does feel as though just there is a bit of a problem at the moment in dealing with everything and the battle with his teammate. It is a mental thing. He's just got to get on top of that. I think he has the capability, but will it happen? That mistake in Canada, that did feel like a bit of a mistake. There's no doubt. That move he tried to make on Oscar Piastri just was not going to work. So he needs to rejig and go for it all again.
And on the other side of it, Oscar Piastri, so cool, so calm, so collected. Does he now think, hang on, here's another little chink in Norris's armour, and perhaps use that as a way to give himself even more confidence if he even needed it?
Yes, confidence plays a massive part in any sport. We've seen it, whether it be football, cricket, rugby. If a player just loses their confidence, they don't have that belief that they have the ability to achieve what they need to achieve. And like Ben touched on, Norris is a very talented driver. He's a race winner. Whether people are saying that McLaren have the best car, which I think they do at this moment in time, but you still have to deliver, and he's got a hugely talented teammate. And I think that confidence we thought was going to start to creep back after Monaco, after that fantastic win he had. But it just seems that Oscar just doesn't get put back, doesn't get knocked back by anything, and that can certainly be frustrating from his point of view or another teammate's point of view, when you're just like, God, how can I upset this driver? How can I upset their rhythm? But as I said, you literally just have to try and focus on what you can control. And at the moment, he can't control what goes on with Oscar out on track.
Yeah, it's the mental isolation that's so impressive about Oscar Piastri. Literally nothing gets to him. I honestly think he's the coolest, calmest Formula One driver I've probably ever seen. I think only Mika Häkkinen, possibly from McLaren, back in the 90s, would compete. I know people listening will say, what about the Iceman, Kimi Räikkönen? But we heard Kimi Räikkönen get energised and upset on the radio from time to time. Piastri just doesn't seem to get affected by anything. And for Lando Norris, that's really difficult, because it's fine if Piastri's slower than him, but if Piastri's quicker than him, Norris has got a double problem. The problem is he knows he can't affect Piastri with his own performance, because what Piastri's doing at the moment is the weekends where he's quickest, he's winning the race. The weekends when he's not quickest, he's still getting really good points. Whereas the weekends that Norris is quickest, he's not always winning the race. Sometimes he's making mistakes. Think about the first lap in Miami. Think about, this wasn't really a mistake that affected him, but think about driving onto the grass alongside Max Verstappen coming out of the pit lane in Japan. Think about what happened in Canada, qualifying in Canada and the race in Canada. Other qualifying sessions that Norris has talked about where he's just not got his lap together when he looked like the quicker McLaren driver but wasn't. So he's facing the double-pronged thing. If he can't affect Piastri, but Piastri is affecting him, and he doesn't seem to be able to stop Piastri affecting him. And how he gets out of that conundrum, well, it's going to define his season, whether he can get out of that conundrum.
I think the amazing thing about Piastri is he's very accepting of his limitations. As you say, Andrew, if he can't put it on pole, he's like, yeah, I didn't think it was there this weekend, so I'm happy with P2 or P3. So that's such a strong mindset to go into every race weekend with. So it's going to be tricky, isn't it, for McLaren for the remainder of the season, trying to manage these two drivers, allowing them to race. And here is what Oscar Piastri thinks of the situation.
It is a difficult position. I think the fact that we've got a healthy lead in the Constructors' Championship makes that a little bit easier to manage, but it's obviously a tough situation. So, I think we've done a very good job of managing things, of preempting things, and not being naive. That whilst it's a good position to be in with two strong drivers and a good lead in the Constructors' Championship, it obviously does have certain aspects that are difficult to manage. So I think we've been doing a very strong job of that.
With quite a healthy lead at the moment, do you envisage a time that you'll feel confident enough to ask Andrea and Zach for preferential treatment at some point?
What, a healthy lead in the Drivers' Championship?
Yeah.
Your version of healthy is much bigger than mine. I think for me, I just want, and we all want, to just have a fair opportunity at trying to win both championships. I think especially in the Drivers' Championship, because it ultimately can only be one of us. I think the situation has to change dramatically to start having those conversations, and they're a very long way away at the moment. So at the moment, all I can ask for is a fair chance to try and win the championship, and that's what I want as well. So no, I'm not willing to enter those talks at all.
A very clever answer, I think, there from Piastri, Ben. And let's face it, there's still such a lot of races to come. This could swing back to Norris, it could swing back to Piastri. And in a way, as fans, we would love to see that, given that they have got the fastest car, and it is probably going to be between the two of them. Absolutely.
No, it could be absolutely fascinating, as you say, going to halfway next week, and it's awesome. That's a long, long way to go. And I hope it does continue like this, because, of course, we would love to see them battle throughout the rest of the season. And still, with Max Verstappen, he's still in the game. Yes, he needs some good results to keep going and not drop the points too far away. And it probably is going to be between Piastri and Norris. But actually, this weekend will be interesting, because Red Bull are bringing in some modifications to the car, both for this weekend and going forward. And this will really be the last time we're going to see modifications on many of the cars, because all the teams are already thinking about next year, when the rules are completely different, all new. So the modifications that we are seeing this weekend, Silverstone next weekend, they are absolutely crucial, aren't they, Alice, to the future of how this championship contestants get on, really?
Yeah, exactly. I still think that it's going to be either Oscar or Lando's to lose. We already said earlier, didn't we, that the Constructors' Championship is heavily in the favour of McLaren. But Max, you can never write him off, of course. He's there in third place on 155 points to Oscar's 198 and Lando 176. But yeah, I still think it's going to be McLaren's to lose. Something needs to go quite wrong for either one of them to drop further down the championship standings and out of the top three. But who knows? It's a close season, and we've seen crazy things happen in the past.
Oh, let's hope we see more crazy things happening, Alice. Well, let's have a bit of a chat about Mercedes now, because our winner last time out was George Russell at the Canadian Grand Prix, and our winner here in Austria the last time out was also George Russell. Okay, inheriting the win because of a collision between Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, but he's been quietly going about his business at Mercedes, and yet his contract with the team comes to an end at the end of the season. So there have been some questions this weekend, Andrew, haven't there, about why can't he get the deal done with Toto? And the sort of the romantic in me thinks, are they waiting for Silverstone to do a nice announcement on home soil for George Russell? That would look really nice, but it doesn't feel like it's going to happen that quickly.
It certainly doesn't look like it, Rosanna. No, Russell made it clear yesterday that the conversations between Mercedes and Max Verstappen about next year are ongoing. That's his phrase. He was very transparent, actually, Russell, saying that he'd been speaking to Toto Wolff, the team principal, and Wolff had said to him that he was very happy with his driving, and there's only one driver in the field you could argue about whether he's doing a better job than Russell, and that driver Russell didn't name, but obviously he's talking about Max Verstappen. People might remember a year ago, Toto Wolff made it clear he wanted Verstappen to join Mercedes instead to replace Lewis Hamilton, who was going to Ferrari. And now Russell's contract is up for negotiation, and Wolff's having talks with Verstappen again. That doesn't mean that Verstappen will end up at Mercedes, but it does put Russell in a very vulnerable and stressful situation. I don't know what's going to happen, Rosanna. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but it's pretty clear that we're now Friday of the Austrian Grand Prix, 6 days away from turning up in Silverstone on Thursday. If Wolff's talking to Verstappen ahead of this weekend, or enough that Russell wants to speak about it ahead of this weekend, unless Verstappen turns around in the next day or so and says to Wolff, "Nah, I'm not going to come after all," then I don't think Russell's going to get a nice British Grand Prix present on that basis.
The romantic in me is going to have to step to one side. Well, let's hear what George Russell has to say on the matter. I had a chat with him about his contract here in Austria.
No major updates as yet. It's not something that I'm pressing massively, because, as I've always said, the performance is the priority, and I feel with the performance I'm showing at the moment, still in line with the performance I've shown over all these years, I've got zero reasons to be worried. But obviously it does help if there was pen on paper, but yeah, let's see.
Why do you get giggly when people ask you about the contract situation?
So you're giggly?
Giggly. There's a little sort of giggle and a little sort of
what is
eyes.
That?
Is it because it's already done and you're hiding it from us?
No, it's not done.
See, there you go again, giggly.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
But you said it would help if you had pen to paper. So why don't you just go and have a little knock on Toto's door?
Because it's not really like I don't need to chase, because I feel that I'm doing a good job. It goes both ways. It's sort of I need them, they need me, and it's sort of that's how it goes. And Mercedes is so ambitious; they want to be back on top. They need to understand and think, how are they going to bring Mercedes back on top? You need to have the best team principal. You need to have the best drivers in your car. You need to have the best engineers within your team. And Toto's made it clear to me that he thinks how I'm performing this year is as good as anybody. I think there's only one driver that is you can debate in terms of performance, and these are his words, these are not my words, so that's why I have no concern about the future. But there's 2 seats to every team, and I guess he needs to think, who are those 2 drivers going to be for those 2 seats? And I guess that's what the delay is.
So what is George Russell saying there? Because we know he's been quite antagonistic when it comes to Max Verstappen recently, perhaps poking the bear a little. Could he work alongside Max Verstappen, or is it going to be a sort of seat swap, Andrew? Could George go to Red Bull and Max go to Mercedes?
I can't see Verstappen and Russell being teammates. They don't like each other, is the bottom line. Now, of course, you don't have to like each other to be teammates in Formula One, and that would be, on paper, the most performant, which is a word people like in Formula One, lineup, Russell and Verstappen. But I think that, Verstappen doesn't have to go to Mercedes. He holds all the cards in this negotiation, and there's a lot of ground to cover. The salary, Verstappen's earning something like $75 million a year from Red Bull. That's just his basic salary without endorsements and everything. Are Mercedes willing to pay that sort of money? And if they aren't, would he go? There's also all the baggage that Verstappen brings with him in terms of he likes priority in the team. You've also got the fact that he's quite a controversial character. Does he fit with the Mercedes brand? And in terms of the way he races. So lots of things for Mercedes and Verstappen to talk about. From Verstappen's point of view, if Mercedes did want Russell to be his teammate ideally, then would he countenance that? And then the question for Mercedes, if they're flirting with Verstappen, and they'd rather keep Russell because he's the most performing driver, what do they do with Kimi Antonelli, who's Toto Wolff's protege? Only 18. He's had a promising start to his year, but he's still not performing regularly at Russell's level. So there's lots of question marks there. Just because they're having talks, Mercedes and Verstappen, doesn't mean that Verstappen's going to end up there, but it does mean that it's a very real possibility. And I think on the basis that you can't really see Russell and Verstappen working together, then it would obviously mean Russell had to look for a drive somewhere else if that was to come to pass. And the only top team with a vacancy would be Red Bull in those circumstances, Verstappen's seat. So super interesting conversation, and of course this part of the season is not called the silly season for nothing.
I agree with that, and it is certainly fascinating to see if they end up swapping from one to the other. But there is no doubt that George Russell's relationship with Mercedes has been very, very good. He has done a fantastic job, and Toto Wolff's been absolutely honest about the fact that they still rate him very, very highly. It would still be a huge blow, though, of course, for him if he ends up getting moved because Max Verstappen comes in. So it's a tricky situation right now. I do rather wonder where this is going to go. And for Toto Wolff, who has made some tough decisions over his career, of course, we shall see how this is all going to work out coming up pretty soon. But I do think it's an absolutely fascinating time in Formula One, and we're already looking to the future in terms of who's going to be driving where, when we're still also focusing on who's likely to win the championship this year.
There are just so many stories to keep an eye on at the moment, off track as well as on track. And this weekend, Andrew, the FIA revealed their guidelines when it comes to penalty points and how they sort of police the drivers out on track. Were you surprised that they shared it? Because some of the drivers didn't realise we hadn't all seen it.
Well, it did come out of the blue a little bit, Rosanna. I mean, the driving guidelines I already have a printout of, actually. I got it at the first race of the season, so I knew what they said already. The stewards' guidelines, it's interesting to see just quite how structured they are in what penalties get given for what behaviour on track. But I think one of the things that's interesting about it is that the drivers still have an issue with the FIA generally, in the sense that Max Verstappen, for example, he wouldn't talk about this issue yesterday, but one of his concerns is that even though they've got this sort of strict outline of what penalty is given for each particular incident, he doesn't believe that that's operated consistently. And I think there's also I think the point also to remember is that they're guidelines, and by definition things are subjective. So just take Verstappen as an example again. The incident between him and George Russell, had that incident been considered deliberate, the collision between those two drivers at turn 5 in Barcelona, Verstappen would have got a much more severe penalty and enough penalty points to take him over the threshold for a ban. But it's obvious from these guidelines that they didn't consider that to be a deliberate collision. But taking a step back, this is Max Verstappen. And how can you say it wasn't deliberate? I mean, Alice is nodding next to me. Of course it was a deliberate move. So why did the stewards take that decision in that scenario? Why did they come to that conclusion? And that feeds into another question which a lot of people have is, the FIA say that consequence is not taken into consideration when they make these decisions. But a lot of the drivers think consequence is taken into the equation, and the stewards look at what's going to be the effect of a penalty point or a penalty on that particular driver and decide whether that's just a justified outcome in a particular scenario. Now, I'm not saying that they do, and they say that they don't. But the drivers feel that certain decisions look like that has been the case. I think by publishing the penalty points scenario, all it's going to do is lead to a lot of questions down the line where people are going down through those outlines, those guidelines, and say, well, hang on a minute, this says this, how come he's got that? So I'm not sure it's necessarily, although it's transparent on one level, I'm not sure it's necessarily going to lead to the extra transparency that they would like to think it will.
So in effect, there'll be more scrutiny rather than transparency.
I think there'll be more scrutiny, definitely, and then as a consequence of that, going to be more questions. And I think the big question that everyone is going to be asking is, have they just done this because this is an FIA presidential year, and Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the president, wants to look like he's being transparent? There's been lots of press releases, recently about governance, transparency this, transparency that, progress on this front, progress on that front, which it kind of flies in the face of all the things that people are saying about the statute changes that Ben Sulayem has been making behind the scenes, which are counter to transparency, counter to accountability, counter to good governance, at least according to Ben Sulayem's critics. So I don't know what the consequence of this is going to be, but I do think it's going to lead to just more and more questions.
Just very quickly, worth pointing out that Carlos Sainz Sr., Carlos Sainz, who's racing in F1 at the moment's father, has pulled out of running for president for the FIA. So that's another bit of news that we probably can't get too much into right now. But if we then sort of run down the news headlines, Sebastian Vettel supposedly has been in touch with Dr. Helmut Marko at Red Bull, wondering whether he might take on a bit of an advisor role. Can you see that happening, guys?
I think so. I think he'd be a good advisor. To be honest, he's a proven championship winner, multiple championship winner, race winner. He's experienced, and he's off track. He conducts himself fantastically. He really seems to be in it for the sport in terms of wanting to bring in the next generation of talent and racers and make positive steps forward with the sport. Of course, then it would be specifically with Red Bull, but I think he'd be a fantastic addition.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and I think he could do a very good job, and it'll be fascinating to see if he comes back in that kind of role. We have seen other drivers in the past, of course, go on to run race teams. He won't be the complete runner of it, but I think it could be a very good element for him.
And another bit of news was that James Vowles has signed a new contract at Williams. We weren't really sure how long the original contract was for, and we don't really know much about the length of this new contract, but it does show that the team want to back him and have him steering the ship for some years to come. And that must feel nice for the team, who are definitely moving in the right direction, Alice.
Yeah, they clearly are. I mean, they've not had the strongest of free practice sessions so far here this weekend, but certainly it's been a massive step forward for Williams this year, and they've got a real strong driver lineup as well. Potentially not as strong as McLaren, but certainly it's very strong.
Right, it is time. I tempted you and teased you at the beginning of the podcast about Brad Pitt being on our show. Can you believe it? It is time to talk about the F1 movie. Who's seen it? Hands up. Tell me if you put your hand up. Remember, it's radio.
I've seen it, Rosanna. Yeah, I saw it in Canada.
Benny. So that was an exclusive screening, was it?
No, there were about 300 other journalists there.
Oh, okay.
But along with the director and the producer and a bunch of other people. But yeah, all the F1 media were there basically in Montreal on the Thursday before the Grand Prix.
Now, I know you don't like giving opinions because you are the BBC's F1 correspondent, but surely this is extracurricular. Did you like it?
I found myself of split opinion about it, Rosanna. I thought that the racing action was terrific. They managed, they use actual Grand Prix footage, and the two Apex Grand Prix cars, as they're known, the team, Brad Pitt and Damson Idris, the two actors, are in the race, but of course they weren't. But you couldn't tell that they weren't. It was brilliant on that front. And I think the cameras in the cars, Pitt and Idris are actually driving modified Formula 2 cars. The cameras in the cars facing towards their helmet, and you do get that sense of authenticity from that. Is it The Godfather or Goodfellas? No, it's not that good a film in my opinion, but I'm not a film critic. I'm a Formula One journalist, and I had questions about certain aspects of the film, the plot, the script and what have you, but the cast are amazing. Brad Pitt, Javier Bardem, Kerry Condon, Kim Bodnia, Tobias Menzies. These are names that are fantastic actors, and so there are many good things about it, but I think the overall thing I would say is that on the one hand, the producer and director have been saying, well, this is the most authentic racing movie that's ever been made. On the other hand, they're saying it's not for you really, it's for a general audience. And to me, there seems to be a dichotomy there. To me, you can't have both. And there were points in the film where I just thought, that would never happen. But I spoke to Jerry Bruckheimer, the producer in Montreal, and he asked me what I thought of it. And I said that, I made that point to him, that some of the racing action I thought was a bit far-fetched. And he said, but it all actually happened, which is kind of true. But they've also taken things and melded things together. So you, as someone who knows a lot about Formula One, you kind of find yourself being pulled up short a little bit and thinking, I'm not quite sure about that. But I think maybe from a Hollywood movie point of view, for a wider audience, they perhaps won't see those extremes. And there's definitely lots of action. So Ben, what did you think about it?
Yeah, well, I went to see it the other day just in a local cinema with my wife, Belinda, and
such a modest mouse, Ben.
No, it was lovely.
You're a modest mouse.
But I really enjoyed it, actually, and I know it might not be perfect for everybody. I can completely understand what Andrew's saying, but just very personally, from my point of view, just going to the cinema, which I don't do very often these days, I have to say, I'm not particularly a cinema man. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the whole thing. As soon as it starts with Brad Pitt playing this driver who's doing a race at Daytona, and just the way that he acted as a driver, I thought was really well done. They've obviously spoken to drivers, to engineers, to all sorts, and they've tried to put all that into it. And as Andrew said, the combination with Formula One, the way they've filmed with Formula One, the way they've been at many Grand Prix, and a lot of the footage is from events, it feels very connected to real Formula One. I've worked in Formula One for many, many years, and it really does feel properly connected to the business now. And yeah, I do totally get, Andrew, that it's not perfect, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.
So maybe it's a case of suspending your disbelief and just tucking into the popcorn and enjoying what's in front of you. Alice, are you going? Have you been? Have you seen?
I have made no plans to go, and I've not seen it, which sounds like I'm not interested. I'm definitely interested in seeing it. I'll have to let you know. Have you seen it?
I haven't. Same.
Well, we can
Very
go
busy
together.
time.
We can go together.
Do you think Abby Pulling would like to come too?
Yeah,
we could have
sure,
a real
she
outing.
would. Producer Paddy's wanting him to come, but we don't want him there, do we? Just a girls' night out only.
Yeah, that would be lovely to go to the cinema all together, because no invites for us to the premiere earlier this week in Leicester Square. But somehow, Harry Benjamin, who I have to say just stopped for a selfie with me here in the paddock, he did get an invite, and he got to have a quick chat with his mate, Brad Pitt.
Brad, can we just talk a bit about the actual driving as well that you had to do a bit more, and that first experience of slamming on the brakes, going on the throttle through a corner? How quickly did you have to get up to speed with all that?
It's awesome. And I know we use that word too much. That word was made for this experience. It is awesome. It is unbelievable. The braking power in these cars, the high-speed corners, the way they stick, the way they take off a line. It is unbelievable.
And working with Lewis, did he give you any tips on that front?
You know what? He's so kind. He got in the car with me and was like, I'm just. It's got to be frustrating for him, and yet he's so kind and so giving, from beginning to the end of the film.
Brilliant, fantastic. Did you learn anything from being embedded in with the paddock for the last 2 years, really?
Yeah, I want to drive.
I wonder, could you see him driving for Cadillac? Do you imagine parking the acting career and joining us here in the F1 paddock? Oh, wow. Well, let's turn our attention back to the real world of Formula One. Who is going to go well this weekend? Who should we be watching out for?
Oh, well, I think it certainly looks as though McLaren are in great shape once again. Lando Norris fastest in FP2, Oscar Piastri there as well, and Max Verstappen. As we've seen throughout the course of this year, they are the front runners, there's no doubt. But I saw some impressive performances from one or two others. Lance Stroll was a bit surprising. Whether he's going to be able to actually maintain that with a decent top 10 qualifying tomorrow. Gabriel Bortoletto as well, he was pretty impressive. And George Russell was quick earlier today, and both of the Mercedes were looking pretty good in race pace. So I think, again, they may well feature, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I'm the same with Ben. I think it's McLaren's to lose. They look pretty strong, but you cannot write off Max Verstappen. He's had great success at this track with 5 wins, and he's got the crowd behind him as well. Not that Max needs anything like that, but yeah, you can't rule him out, but I think it's McLaren's to lose.
Do you know, I think it looked really close today, particularly the race runs, which normally give things away. I could not call it between any of the top 4 teams. I think in the end, it'll be McLaren against Red Bull, and Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, I don't know, but I do think that Norris needs to bounce back, and he's looking quick today. So if he can put it together in Q3, which has been his big thing this year, then maybe it could be Norris.
Yeah, Lando Norris needs a good weekend, get himself back into that positive momentum. Lots to look out for both on and off track in F1 at the moment. Andrew Benson, Alice Powell, Ben Edwards, thanks so much for looking ahead to the weekend with me. Lights go out on Sunday at 2 o'clock, and you can listen to the race on BBC 5 Live. But from me, Rosanna Tennant, and all the team, well, it's goodbye, and this has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.